Do you want to get from this? He slept soundly until 2 a.m., when Richard woke him. Billy, you need to leave the room. It's not safe. The statues are angry. To this? He slept soundly until 2 a.m., when Richard woke him.
Billy, you need to leave the room. It's not safe. The statues are angry. Go sleep on the second floor. They have a hard time with stairs.
Let's talk about 3 techniques we can steal from the acting world that will really help our narration. So my first audition, I actually went with my mom to the audition. I was in early high school. I couldn't drive yet. And I had printed out the monologue that I was going to be performing for this audition. I hadn't finished memorizing my monologue yet, and I actually still had the paper with me while I was sitting in the passenger seat, just cramming like you would for a test. And as I'm reading it out loud, my mom turns to me and she says, "Did you know you're totally monotone?" And I'm sitting here reading this, and I know the emotions that I want to feel, and I know the emotions that this character would be going through. And so I turn around and I'm like, no, I'm not. I sound totally emotional. And she just looks at me with this, okay. I think one of the core things that's really important for a narrator is that when you want to turn on that emotion, you need to be able to. And it takes practice. It takes time. So I want to talk about some of the techniques that actors use so that they can produce those emotions. First technique, ground the character. Basically, grounding the character is connecting the parts of you that are similar to the character and the character itself. So that way you have more realistic interactions with the things that they say and the things that they hear. In one of the recent roles that I did, I got to portray quite an intelligent mathematician, and it was from an era where people who were educated and who were acting in scholarly ways were educated in a myriad of different experiences. And I was lucky enough that I was educated in chemistry. So I actually could connect a lot of his physics and math knowledge to real applications that I had. And so when I performed that role, when I portrayed that character, it was real. When you portray a character, it should be an extension of yourself. So what we're going to talk about in the next section is answering essential questions. And you're going to have to make certain choices in order to answer those questions. So connected to that, in your narrated characters, one of the things that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find connective tissue, find places where you connect to the character, so that when you have those reactions, even if they're subtle, even if they're nuanced, they have detail and they have meaning. And that's super useful. Now, making choices is a term that a lot of actors in the audience are going to understand wholeheartedly. Basically, what it means is every time you hit a point where something's ambiguous, you don't know why a character is doing this, and you may never know. The author may purposefully leave it vague. You, as the storyteller, need to know the answer. Now, what that means is if the author hasn't given you the answer, you have to choose. You have to make a choice that is fitting with that situation. Now, let's talk about the next section where we go into the essential questions. Number 2, build the character. So I was in a show recently, and one of the things that happened is I was representing a character who, by American standards, would just be an angry dude that was in an unhappy marriage. But within the context of the world that he was in, and this was 1900 Spain, when they were still having arranged marriages, he had to get married for his financial status. And he didn't want to get married to the person that he married. He wanted to marry somebody that he was in love with and was in love with him. At least that's the way it was written. But what ended up happening was that the actor I was acting against didn't portray that love directly. And so it went from me being a character who was deeply in love with somebody to the point where it changed the fabric of the story. It gave context to my character, and it turned it into somebody who was just kind of an asshole. And one of the core things about that story is that the other actor made a choice that was against the will of the person writing the story. And that's something we have to be really careful that we don't do as narrators. Now, one of the best ways to avoid that is by talking to your author. Okay, So, let's talk about the questions you should be asking yourself for each character. And again, the narrator is a character, so ask yourself these questions for them as well. Number 1, who am I? Now, these are going to be questions like name, job, cultural history. Give yourself an idea of the context of the character. Number 2, where am I? Now, these are going to be questions like, what country are you in? What city are you in? Is it a big one? Is it a small one? And what level do you perform at? Are you the mayor of the town? Are you the governor of the state? Are you the president of the country? Do you work in business? Are you a lobbyist? Or are you just an everyday person? And how does that affect where you are aiming your life? Number 3, when am I? What time period are you in? Are you in modern day? Are you in the 1920s? Are you in the medieval era in Europe? All of this will affect how you interact with people. So you should be thinking about, how do the elders and the youngers interact in that time period? And how do people of different financial areas relate to each other? You know, nowadays it would be considered incredibly rude for a CEO to turn around and shout at somebody who was poor. But back in the medieval era, that was a common occurrence. Because of the way that power dynamics work, they just would have had zero agency, and the nobility would not have cared. If a noble cared, that has even more weight. So these are questions that you need to be thinking about when you have those characters interact. Number 4, what do I want? What do you, as a character, want to achieve? If you're the narrator, maybe this is helping people understand how important the three-toed sloth is for its ecosystem. Or if you're an individual character in the story, maybe it's that you want to gain political power so that you can affect change because when you were younger, your mother was left out on the street and wasn't able to fend for herself, and you never want any mother to be left in that situation again. All of these condition how you do something. And when you're talking to somebody in a conversation, your character that is, you need to know exactly why you would say the things that you said. Which brings us to number 5. Number 5, why do I want it? Now, all of these places are opportunities to make choices. All of these places are moments when you can sit down and say, this isn't clear. The author hasn't said. So I'm going to give it meaning. Things to think about in this question are, who's depending on me? What depends on this decision right now? This could be a multi-layered why. The character could want in this conversation with a big CEO at a board meeting to gain their confidence. But instead of that confidence being because they want to advance their business career, maybe they were badly done to in a previous part of their life by the CEO who doesn't remember them, and they're trying to get revenge. So you have to play the subtlety between, I want to get in this guy's good graces so that I can undercut him. And that's going to be a different delivery than, I want to get in this guy's good graces so I can learn from him. Which also brings us to a question of, is this a selfish idea? Is this something that they want because they have very self-earned motivation? Or is it something they want because they're protecting somebody else, or they're interested in helping somebody else, or hurting somebody else? These are questions that you need to answer for each character so you have a good idea of what it is that they want and why they want it, and you can convey that to the audience. Now, the third technique is something that the actors in the audience are going to be really familiar with, and it's the idea that acting is reacting. Scenes don't look real if you don't have the individuals in those scenes interacting normally. Take a look at this and I'll show you why. Hey Amir, have you heard about the restaurant on the moon? The moon? How is that even possible? Apparently the food is great, but the atmosphere is lacking. Huh? Hey Amir, have you heard about the new restaurant on the moon? The moon? How is that even possible? Apparently the food is great, but the atmosphere is lacking. Sometimes when you're talking, you might convey an effective emotion, but if it doesn't sound like you're listening to the other character, it's not going to hit the same way. So this is nuanced, but the core idea is listen to what's being said to you. If you're the narrator, you should be listening to what the author says to you, or what the characters are saying to you. And they're going to have certain outcomes that they want in a given situation. So if they're talking about that same three-toed sloth and they're trying to convince you of its benefit to the ecosystem and why you as an individual should care, they're going to want their narrator, you, to emphasize those moments a little bit more so that they stand out to the audience. Or alternatively, in a fantasy book, the author's still an important character. They get to reflect in a moment, even in third-person narrators, on what is going through the character's head. And oftentimes an author will want this to be subtle, but not monotone. And there's a difference. You need to know the distinction. You need to color that story so that it's interesting for an audience member. If you're a character, you should be listening to what another character is saying to you in the story, or what your environment is telling you as you interact with it. What are they doing to my what do I want and why do I want it? Is it stopping me from getting it, or is it giving it to me? And that's going to color how you feel about it. And characters in those moments are in a scene, like the one I showed at the top of this section. Amir doesn't want a dad joke, but he does want to hear this news. How do I convey that as an individual? Because I think there's some exciting news that I'm interested in. And then at the end, I find out, oh, he's just dropping a dad joke on me. God, I hate it. Right? You can bring those emotions into scenes in the book. So to conclude, those are the techniques we can take from the acting world to really help your narration. Number 1, ground the character. Get in your character's head. What's their natural environment feel like? What are they like? Do they have any similarities to anybody that you know? And ground that in your experience. Number 2, build the character. Ask those essential questions. Where am I? Who am I? What do I want? Why do I want it? All of those are super important, especially for characters that go through the length of the book, but kind of for everybody. You want to have an idea of what that is so that when you convey their emotions, you have a really clear idea of what they want. And 3, react to what's said or what's around you. Don't just say the things that you want to say, but listen to what has been said to you and respond to it with the words you're given. I hope this brings you something that you can take to your narration so that you can improve and land that next audition. If you have any questions or comments or any ideas or anything you want me to talk about, leave them in the comments. I try to read every single one, and I will let you know. Maybe I'll make a video about it. Maybe I'll just respond in the comments. Who knows?
Hey, buckaroo.
Don't call me buckaroo. You know I hate that. Just explain the statues.
Aren't these cool, son? My own private army.
There were at least a dozen statues spaced about 70 feet apart, standing in a line along the checkerboard wall. They stood facing away from the barrier as if guarding it, all except a strange 3-party greeting committee, about 50 feet up the driveway. The center one was large and imposing, easily 8 feet tall, the only statue not holding a tool. Some sort of emperor or king. The muscular sculpture stared menacingly at Billy, holding its thick arms across its torso as if expecting something.
Ain't paying no toll, hoss, he thought. Good luck with that.